Welcome to the Pot of Inquiry. Ready for some thought-provoking cerebral whipping and the destruction of ridiculous medical dogma? Want to shift those stale, moldy old paradigms? Well then, don that thinking cap of yours, get down in the cave, and join our host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, for this week's episode. Let's start spelunking.
All right. Welcome to the Pot of Inquiry, everyone. I have a very special episode lined up for you today. And I've been working with these two gentlemen I'm just about to introduce since about the end of July. And I'm really excited about being able to present my findings and the excellent work that the folks over at TROKIE have been doing. So let me introduce Dr. Kenton Crawley, who is the Chief Medical Officer of TROKIE, and Gavin Chandler, who is the CEO of TROKIE. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. Happy to be on the show. We're big fans.
Yeah. And I want to mention to everybody that TROKIE is a very instrumental and prominent sponsor of the show now. So we'll give you more information later on how you can jump on the TROKIE bandwagon like I have. So I guess without saying much more, do you want to just get into the discussion and show the folks what we've got?
Absolutely. Give me just 1 second. Are you seeing it?
I am. Looks very good.
All right. Excellent.
So Gavin, why don't you start off just telling the people that are listening and watching what TROKIE is, and then we'll get more into the weeds, so to speak.
Sure. Thank you very much, Stephen. So TROKIE is a dietary supplements company, and we specialize in phytocannabinoids, and we specialize in proprietary and novel delivery systems for phytocannabinoids, with the goal of serving healthcare professionals and their patients. So that is, and we do that via both products and services, and we believe in rigorously testing our products and applying the scientific method to our products and helping our patients to achieve their health goals through coordination with their HCPs, tools such as evaluation and assessment tools to track their progress, along with the products. So we consider ourselves to be a health and wellness solutions company.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and get started into the presentation, if you'd be so kind. All right. So I want to talk about my N of 1 study. So when I had the fortune to cross paths with you all back this last summer, I do a lot of N of 1 studies because I never like to recommend anything to anybody unless I've actually tried it on myself and I see some benefit. And so I wanted to look at your product from not only a sleep standpoint, but also just basically for a calming effect from the phytocannabinoids that you all have. So let's go ahead and advance it if we can. And
already done our introduction.
Yep, we've done that. So, all right. So I just wanted to start with everybody who is trained in a certain way will many times become hammers because that's what we have. That's our tool. And one of the things that I learned in peripheral nerve surgery and then with an ultimate focus on peripheral neuropathy was that we had this great ability to take care of peripheral nerve entrapments with peripheral nerve surgery decompression. However, many of our patients got 100% relief. Some got 80, some less. But then we had to start looking at the patient rather than just the peripheral nerve entrapment. And we found that if we could optimize patients from a core standpoint, metabolically improve them, and treat them as a whole individual, our peripheral nerve surgery just got that much better. So even though we have this surgeon mentality that, I've got this hammer in my hand, everything is not a nail, and we learned that very quickly. All right. Now that we know the front and back, or forward and reverse buttons. Well,
sorry about that.
That's all right. So we had these patients that wouldn't get the ultimate outcome that we wanted. And so the question is, well, what do I do now? So I asked my very esteemed colleague, Dr. Andy Rader, who I go to a lot of times in tough cases because he has such a wicked sense of everything that we normally don't see. And he's kind of like the guy in the cave that you go visit, and he's the one that tells you, hey, you need to think about this. And so we need to think about homeostasis. And homeostasis is just, I guess, for a lack of a better way to explain it to folks that aren't physicians, is that it's kind of like a general balance of all of the different systems that are going on. Kent, would you agree with that definition?
Yes, it's the term describes a physiologic balance for that individual.
Correct. So anyhow, when we talk about homeostasis in these patients, how do we get that? So let's go to the next slide. And so I had to go to my fortune teller to get a second opinion on what we can do to help these folks with homeostasis. And she had me peer into this leaf in her crystal ball, and I saw this molecule and didn't know quite what it was. But then after working with you guys, I realized, this is phytocannabinoid substitution, or supplementation, I should say, for our endocannabinoid system. Let's go to the next slide. So the endocannabinoid system is kind of an interesting thing. And since I have one of the world's experts, Kent, why don't you talk about this? Because I could do a fair job, but you're going to do an excellent job.
Well, the endocannabinoid system touches every physiologic process that goes on in our body, in every cell, every millisecond. It's involved in our everything from appetite, metabolism, our physical sensations, and involved very importantly with our immune system.
How long ago was the endocannabinoid system discovered? Because I know it's relatively new.
Well, they started working with cannabinoids back in the early 80s.
Okay. But did they recognize that there was an endogenous system, or was that just initial drug discovery?
Yeah, no, it is in the recent decade that they started really focusing on the importance of something. We have always thought about what regulates our homeostasis is our HAP axis and our thyroid. But actually, the endocannabinoid system sits on top of that system and helps regulate communication between every cell.
So it's kind of like a master control of human physiology. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we see such dramatic differences when we work with the endocannabinoid system, because everyone has slightly different binding, affinity to binding receptors, the number of receptors, any of those physiologic changes that can be discussed around single nuclear polymorphisms. You just have it's just very different.
Interesting. Let's go ahead, Gavin, to the next one if you could. All right. Oh, Kent, since you're on a roll, why don't you continue on with your descriptions of the endocannabinoid system?
So, our endocannabinoid system is involved in stress, diet, exercise, and sleep. It's involved in just about every aspect of our lifestyle and how we engage with our environment. Our endocannabinoid system has something to do with it.
So there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on this, but you guys have, I think, built on a tremendous amount of research that's still relatively unrecognized in the mainstream day-to-day understanding of this system. I mean, everybody understands the opioid system pretty well, but the endocannabinoid system really is a homeostatic, like I mentioned earlier, a master control switch, so to speak. And if we can integrate this type of therapy to our patients, we can't help but make them better, because we're basically just trying to get that master control upregulated so that it works most efficiently.
Absolutely.
All right, let's jump to
I think that's I'm sorry, Stephen, I was just going to add one thing, I think that's probably the most important point, is that this has become increasingly of interest to clinicians and academic scientists as we learn more and more about the ECS and its effects and the signaling patterns that are involved. And as Ken said, every day we seem to learn a new place that it touches. And the fact that it's a fine-tuning system, right? It's not a system that's designed to create gross effects, but rather to be the part of your physiology that is fine-tuning things, and then also our discovery that your endogenous cannabinoids, your endocannabinoids that are meant to interact with the ECS, come in a variety of different forms. And then when we started to discover them, the ECS system in other organisms, I think that was another a point that was fascinating that Kent alerted me to when I first started learning about this stuff as CEO, that the ECS, we've found the ECS system in all animals so far. And so you find an ECS system in insects. We find it in plants. We find it in lots of different types of organisms. And then when we come to the subject of phytocannabinoids, it's such a diverse group of molecules. In the cannabis plant alone, we've identified over 150 different cannabinoids, and they seem to find a new one every day. and the related molecules of terpenes that are in there that also have found out they have, a influence on physiological response. So it's this incredibly complex picture, and a lot of research is now starting to be done on it, because they're finding not only physiological effect but therapeutic benefit.
So I think I wanted to follow up on one point, because I think it's a good point in this discussion to talk about the endocannabinoid system. And the question I have is, pretty much every system in human physiology can be worn out, degraded, and as you mentioned earlier, Kent, sleep, exercise, stress, diet, these things play a role with the endocannabinoid system. So how often does it get down-regulated in humans? I mean, we know, for example, with nitric oxide, at about age 40, you're producing less and less each year. Is it the same thing with the ECS?
There are syndromes that Russo and others have described, endocannabinoid deficiency syndromes.
Okay.
And they participate with many of the chronic diseases that we have. So it's
So that's pretty compelling then on why we would want to supplement with phytocannabinoids to upregulate the system that may be being downregulated by our current metabolic or immune status or whatever else is going on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very interesting.
I think that's a critical point that you just made, Stephen, that from what we're learning about the endocannabinoid system now, because it is a fine-tuning system, sure, there are probably age effects, and there are some studies that talk about age effects and syndromes that are specifically associated with endocannabinoid deficiencies. But we also are learning that just day-to-day processes, as was shown in the last slide, if you don't get a good night's sleep, if you toss and turn for one night, you all of a sudden you'll find yourself in your ECS in an imbalanced position, so to speak.
Right.
Or if you're stressed out, you'll find your endocannabinoid system is not responding as if it would normally respond if you weren't in a stress system. So, or a stress state. So I think that that's an important point you made, that it's what we're finding out is that it's because it's involved in so many things, it's affected by so many things. And so that can happen at any age. That can happen. We have a lot of our patients who are using the product who are in their early 20s. You talked about calm. I mean, some of our patients say, hey, we like to use the broad spectrum formula when we're studying, because it helps to just reduce our stress level, reduce feelings of anxiousness, maybe when they're taking a test, things like this. So it's certainly, in our experience, we don't have a weighting towards age groups. That was one of the interesting things about our particular patient population. And even if you look at the broader use of cannabinoids in the population, it's very evenly distributed across age groups. It's that just an interesting point of real world uses of it.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and keep pressing on, because this is great stuff. Yeah. So this is something, Kent, that I want you to expand on, because after talking with Cody on a few episodes back, Cody Peterson's 2 episodes actually were fantastic, and he talked about the different receptors. So you want to dial into that a little bit, because I think there's some confusion, generally speaking, that these are totally isolated, and we know that's not the case.
No, the receptors are ubiquitous in our physiology, even though there are certain areas that we find concentrations, like CB1 receptors in the brain, and CB2 receptors mainly in the periphery, on our immune cells and on our skin. But we have both CB1 and CB2 all over our skin. So there are many other receptors. Probably GRP55 will be, the third cannabinoid receptor, if everyone agrees to, call it that.
And what did you say that was again? GRP55?
GRP55. It's one of the G protein coupled receptors.
Okay. All right.
But, the TRIPS, V1, M8, the 5-HTA1, there is so many things that phytocannabinoids touch that regulate all of our physiology.
Interesting.
Amazing.
All right, let's go ahead.
That's been one of the really interesting things about the modern science. Is just every time we do another in vitro study, they find that another place where the endocannabinoid system, or where CB1 or CB2 receptors create downstream signaling or upstream back regulation signaling that touch all sorts of metabolic pathways. And as Ken said, every time we look, we find it's like, wow, these are big central, signaling hubs, right? They reach out and touch out, tons of different places in the physiology. And these are just a couple of the of ones that are, are high on the list. But every day you find another paper. We'll talk a little bit about, some of the journals that are out there that talk about this stuff. But every day they're seeing new places where it touches. It's pretty amazing.
And that was great, Gavin. The remarkable thing is there is so many things that we are still trying to understand. This is an adaptogenic herb. It drives homeostasis in our physiology. And because there's so many touch points that this adaptogenic herb touches, it's very difficult to fit, the standard scientific research platform where you're trying to clamp one physiologic process and then say that this is going to work, like FAW inhibitors, which break down the endocannabinoids, were identified as having very prominent physiologic effects. But when you use them in a living, being, whether it's an animal or what, you had catastrophic outcomes because you can't just look at one pathway and clamp it and ignore the up and downstream effects that Gavin discussed.
All right, very interesting. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. So we've talked about the phytocannabinoids. Kent, do you want to expand on this just a little bit? I think we've really kind of touched on this. One of the things that Cody mentioned, which I was kind of shocked about, was that there's really not much difference between sativa and indica. That
well, it's just like other terms used, in the cannabis space. There's a Miri's lab in Israel has at least identified 152 phytocannabinoids, but there is over 500 physiologic substances that can be found in the cannabis plant and have a physiologic effect on a human. And whether they're polyphenols, carotenoids, flavonoids, different fatty acids, it's just profound. And when you try and work with those molecules in whatever form you're consuming the cannabis with, it has profound differences. The cannabis sativa L plant, whether it's marijuana or it's hemp, that's a regulatory term to define based on THC content. So hemp is a 0.3% or less, and anything above 0.3% having THC in it is considered marijuana. So the terms sativa and indica are terms that describe the look of the plant. Sativa being very tall and lanky and generally exhibiting a stimulatory effect of the phytocannabinoids in it and the terpenes, and indica being a squatty short plant. And it really, they're both the same plant. They've just been grown in different areas, and based on those regions that they grow, the plant is adapted for whatever survival mechanisms are involved there. So I
want to interject there because I think there's a close analogy to wine and viticulture, because what you're saying is that you can have a plant that has all of these different constituents, but it may be different depending on how it's cultivated in one area versus another area. It may have a little bit, the French use the word terroir in winemaking, that everything from the sunlight, the type of moisture in the air, how they plowed the areas around it, all of these things go into the ultimate creation of whatever vintage that was. So you could have a Cabernet Franc grape in one area and in another area, and they could be
entirely different tasting.
Exactly.
Right. That's exactly what has been shown in research. A lot of this work has been done in Israel, but you can take the same genetics and put it in two different controlled environments, two different locations of
Right.
a controlled environment that's identical, and you will still have different cannabinoid and
Profiles.
phytonutrient content, right? Profiles.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor.
I'm constantly exploring new avenues to enhance well-being and address any health concerns. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an exciting supplement called Stem Regen, which I take daily and genuinely believe could revolutionize your health journey as well. Stem Regen stands out as a game changer in the realm of wellness. Crafted from 5 potent plant extracts, it boasts a remarkable ability to stimulate the release of your body's own stem cells from your red bone marrow. Why is this significant? Well, stem cells are the superheroes of our body's natural repair system. They possess the extraordinary capacity to morph into various cell types, aiding in tissue regeneration and repair. As we age, the quantity of circulating stem cells in our system reduces significantly, impairing our body's ability to heal and rejuvenate itself effectively. Stem Regen steps in to counter this decline by kickstarting the release of stem cells into circulation, thereby bolstering your body's innate repair mechanisms. Once unleashed into your bloodstream, these mobilized stem cells actively seek out areas of damage or injury, initiating the healing process. By incorporating Stem Regen into your daily routine, you're essentially empowering your body to tap into its own regenerative prowess more efficiently. I firmly believe that Stem Regen could be a valuable addition to your wellness regimen, especially if you're seeking to fortify overall health and vitality, accelerate tissue repair, or expedite recovery from injury or illness. This first of its kind stem cell mobilizer is changing the game in regenerative medicine. Don't wait to unleash your body's innate healing capabilities. Visit stemregen.co/Dr. Steven, that's with a PH, and use the code SBPOD to get a 15% discount off your first order of Stem Regen. Yeah, and then the other thing that I think is an important point is that you're looking at not just one single molecule in this plant. You're looking at all the terpenes, all the polyphenols. And so what you're getting with plant-based material is a symphony versus a single molecule, which would be like the trumpet, right?
Right. And that symphony can alter the receptors based on how they bind. And that is a variable that exists genetically in all of us. And that is why this adaptogenic herb can touch so many different systems and subjectively or objectively have a different effect between one person and another.
Very interesting.
I'd like to expand on this just a little bit, Stephen, and just to go back to your original point. When people, because we have to explain this to our customers and our patients a lot, that it's important for people to understand that indica and sativa were really terms of art use in the recreational space, right? They have no scientific meaning. And so when they originally did represent what's the best way to couch it? They used to represent leanings or sort of average predispositions of a given cultivar to have a certain terpene profile. Like Kent said, sativa used to be associated back in the day. It was associated with more stimulatory terpenes. And the indica plants tend to have more a prevalence of sedating terpenes that went along with the THC that's in it. Even now today, those have no meanings because there's been so much crossbreeding and development of new cultivars that now you're starting to hear these terms like indica dominant or sativa dominant. From a scientific standpoint, both Kent and I, it drives us crazy because we're trying to have these discussions with clinicians, and we're like, forget about all that. All
Right.
you really care about is what are the cannabinoids that are primarily in it, which we show you in our certificate of analysis. What are the predominant terpenes that provide for, and what are the effects of those? So
Right.
we're from a wellness and a dietary supplement standpoint. I think that the players like us who are focused on the HCP channel are moving away from these definitions, and like Cody are much more talking about how can certain molecules that are present in symphony provide a certain a lean towards the physiological response. So I think that's really what we're working towards.
Right. Just so everybody knows, I'm referring to Cody Peterson, who is the pharmacologist that we featured back in October. It was season 5, episode 5 and episode 6. So if anybody wants to go back and get a really hardcore, detailed explanation of the pharmacology of cannabis, that would be a great primer for you.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend 8 hours talking about the
Easily.
endocannabinoid system and all of the receptors and their actions. It's just such an inclusive, ubiquitous system in our physiology.
And still relatively a new frontier.
Yeah, it's just a rapidly expanding field of
Right.
research because
Right.
it's big. There's just a lot to learn.
Right. Well, let's jump ahead. Let's keep going. Now, this is real interesting because you'll talk to people and they'll say they have their different delivery system of choice. So, Kent, you want to dive into this a little bit, because I think this really plays a role of why TROKIE is so it's just so good for integrating into your patients.
Well,
Treatment plan.
every way that medication is delivered except IV, let me start that over again. Cannabis comes in a myriad of routes of administration and forms. Currently, still in the United States, greater than 70% of the consumption of cannabis is still smoking or vaping a plant material. Inhalation, again, is one route. Edible, you're consuming either a food product, or a drink, or something that you're swallowing. That's typically considered an edible. Then you have the pharmaceutical dosage forms like a capsule or a tablet. There is different types of dosage forms that are designed to be put in the mouth and absorbed buccally or sublingually. And those terms are just used to describe placement in the mouth. So between cheek and gum or under the tongue, sublingual is under the tongue.
Right.
These placements in the mouth can affect how much saliva you produce. And so some of these dosage forms are designed to minimize that. There's topical products, creams, ointments, balms, patches, even balms, bath bombs. You'll find just about every thing that you can think of, cannabis has been placed into it, and also suppositories. So
let me ask you this, Kent, because it seems to me that this is pretty straightforward to categorize delivery mechanisms as things that will undergo a first pass effect in the liver versus things that won't. And
correct.
So if we are eating a gummy or a brownie or something, that's got to be broken down by the GI system and then absorbed, and then it has a first pass effect. Does it not?
It does.
Okay. And a sublingual.
Emptying, for instance, the stories that you hear of people experiencing an unpleasurable experience, we're generally eating an edible, and that edible, depending on what is in the stomach, could take from 30, 45 minutes in certain forms to 4 hours, because gastric emptying after a meal, can take up to 4 hours if it's a fatty meal. And people consuming an edible like a brownie or a cookie or a gummy, they'll take one, they'll wait 30 minutes, 45 minutes, even an hour. They don't feel anything. They take another one. They still don't feel anything, and take a third or fourth, and all of a sudden everything hits them.
Kind of like the Wolf of Wall Street.
Right. And when when that goes through the GI tract, that then has first pass metabolism. And if those products were containing THC, delta 9 in the neutral form, it's going to be metabolized to the 11-hydroxy metabolite, which is 3 to 6 times more intoxicating.
So wait, let me go back on that for a second. So you're saying that an edible administration is actually going to give you a little bit different metabolite than a sublingual or buccal administration?
You'll have those metabolites formed, but that formation is entirely different pharmacokinetically.
Okay.
So you're dealing with certain routes of administration which don't have good bioavailability. And then you're dealing with routes of administration that can have very high bioavailability, whether they're bypassing first pass metabolism or not, and the content that that particular product has. What is its phytocannabinoid profile?
So let me
All of
ask
those things influence.
Let me ask you one more question just so I can get dialed in on this. Is there any difference in bioavailability between a sublingual and a buccal administration, or is it just the amount of saliva that's produced?
It really depends on the person and what they do with that dosage form. Most sublingual tinctures, which are really a misbranded term, a tincture is an ethanol-based solution. Most of the tinctures that are in the cannabis market are oil-based, using MCT oil or some other, fatty acid, which does help improve bioavailability. But when you put an ml under your tongue and hold that liquid for 10 to 15 minutes, you can get some oromucosal absorption. Most people, and even the instructions on the tincture boxes or products, say hold it in your mouth for 30 seconds and then swallow. Well,
now it becomes an edible.
You got it. And that's where you get that very huge variable with what's in the stomach, how's the GI tract working, and then the formulation. Once it goes down the hatch, it's generally a whole lot less bioavailable. If we're using a TROKIE, for instance, a lozenge between cheek and gum, you can place that under your upper lip, which is the least site, well, it's a site that causes the least amount of saliva production. And so that can sit there for 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the moisture in the mouth and whether that dosage form is left alone or not. And you get profoundly improved bioavailability, onset of action much quicker. The TROKIE actually has a 5 to 15 minute onset of action. Some people claim that within a couple, 3 minutes, they can feel the impact in that dosage form and route of administration.
Well, I think this is a really important point because a lot of people spend a lot of money on supplementation, and the difference between administration 1 versus administration type 2 can be the difference between efficacy and something that's just non-efficacious. And so I think you guys have kind of hit on, I don't like to use the word perfect, but let's say the ideal bioavailability delivery form, because I'm not a big fan of smoking or putting things in people's lungs. And when we had a medical marijuana focused clinic in Arizona, there was a big pushback from a lot of our older chronic pain patients that they didn't really want to inhale anything. They didn't want to vape things. And so now if you go into, like you mentioned, the tinctures and having to hold that in your mouth for a long, long period of time, well, what are you really getting out of it versus the TROKIE administration, I think is probably the most ideal. In my mind, it's the most ideal administration.
Can I just speak to that? What you just mentioned has been a discussion that we've had with our clinicians when they're asking about this, particularly the ones that have experience, like you do, with cannabinoids therapy, with cannabis therapy, that most clinicians do not like the idea of inhalation in any form, right? Whether it's whether you're vaping an extract or a wax or shatter or whatever the other trade name products they have out there for for concentrates, right?
Right.
Or just combustion of the plant material. They just really prefer not to do that. You don't want to insult the lungs if you don't have to. Dosing is certainly a little bit easier in that in that form because you do get high absorption and you do get rapid onset of effect, right? So
Right.
It achieves one thing that the edible, the oral gastric route doesn't. But they just don't want to do that for obvious reasons, right? You don't want to insult the lungs. So they move on to the next thing that is the normal thing, which is some sort of an edible form. And the problem that all the clinicians have with the edible forms and going through the oral gastric route is twofold. One, that you're getting the first pass metabolism, right? And then second, you're just getting this highly variable absorption. So dose titration is extremely difficult, right? And then what we also know from the science is that in a lot of cases with a lot of different cannabinoids that have been studied, we can see U-shaped dose response curves. So it's really easy to when we're instructing our clinicians, we're always telling them go low and slow. And when we're talking to a patient, go low and slow. Find that absolute minimum level that gives you a physiological effect, and maybe just play around that dose. Do not go too much further because you can go over the top of the U-shaped curve. The receptors, the signaling starts to push back because it's a fine tuning system, and all of a sudden it doesnm work anymore, right? You took too much, and sometimes overdosing leads to either adverse events, and those are much more modest, but we've seen them. But a lot of times we see people take too much, and then it just stops working,
right?
And because they get a down regulation of the receptors that are in play. So the idea with a product like TROKIE is that you get really consistent dosing, so it's a lot easier to titrate dosing, and then you can take the same dose over and over again and get the same effects. So I think that's a great point to make, is that that's the discussions we have with our clinicians and patients.
That's great.
It's important to recognize, though, that phytocannabinoids in an individual generally will be biphasic in their activity. And biphasic meaning at a low dose, they're going to get a physiologic effect, which is generally beneficial. And at a higher dose, they're going to get a physiologic effect, and it can be beneficial or not, depending on the type of product and the content of the phytocannabinoids. So cannabis is nonlinear pharmacokinetics, very biphasic in its action. And that's why you always start, like Gavin said, start low and go up slow, because every individual is going to find a sweet spot at a low dose and another sweet spot at a higher dose.
Gotcha. That's a good
I have
point.
one more point. Well, I have one more point to add to that that is flummoxed a lot of clinicians, and that they're happy to have this information from us, and this comes right out of some of our clinical trial data, is that the endocannabinoid system can be vastly different from person to person, which Kent already discussed, and actually when we were looking at our clinical trial data, and we were looking at dose as a function of body mass index. And because a lot of standard fare is that, okay, the more you weigh, the more you need, right? And actually that we found that to absolutely not be the case with our products. And I think that there's additional science and publications that have shown that you can have a 120-pound person, female, who doesn't find a therapeutic effect until they're taking 30 milligram doses. And then you can find a 400-pound man who gets a therapeutic effect with 5 milligrams of the same product. And it has much more to do with the starting state of their endocannabinoid system than it does with how much they weigh. So that's another point that just it makes dosing so important, right? Dose titration so important.
Right.
And remember that many of the receptors that are involved, like G protein coupled receptors, GPR system, are essential fatty acid dependent. And so if someone is deficient in their essential fatty acids, like omega-3s or omega-9s, their receptors are not going to respond like someone that is in good shape.
Interesting.
Fatty acid wise.
That's a great point. Clinically, I mean, it's pretty much.
Well, it's one of the
right.
things you start scratching your head when someone's consuming a hemp-based product that's focused on CBD, for instance, and they don't respond at all to it. Then you start wondering, are we deficient in essential fatty acids?
Great point. All right, everyone, this has been an incredible discussion, and you can tell how robust it is because it's just voluminous in the amount of material that we've covered. We're going to divide this now into 2 episodes, so you can pick up the remainder of this great episode on next week's podcast. But before we sign off, I want Gavin just to explain how you can get enrolled, so that if you miss next week's podcast, you can still get started for your treatment plans with patients with this great product.
Sure, Stephen. So we have endeavored to create a suite of tools and programs for supporting clinicians and their patients. And these tools include a custom landing page for patients to access that is specifically branded for the clinician's practice. In this case here is yours for the U.S. Neuropathy Centers and for the Pod of Inquiry. We also provide in-office signage. We provide a starting products package. We provide physical and digital brochures. We provide a subscription to the TROKIE Tracker assessment tool, which allows patients and their clinicians to not only establish a baseline for wellness goals, but also to track their wellness goals over time. And we also provide managed content services where we provide educational content for the clinician to provide to their patient on a digital basis via email and other types of channels. Or we can take over that process and actually directly communicate with the patients on the doctor's behalf.
No, that's awesome. And, the clinical practices are getting so busy now that anything you can do to help the clinician implement this for their patient treatment plans is so appreciated.
Sure. And the really nice thing that the doctors have appreciated about this particular, or the way that we've set this up, is it has robust tracking. It collects a lot of data that we can feed back to the doctors so that they understand how they're doing, how their patients are doing. In the future, we're going to have aggregate data from TROKIE Tracker that allows them to understand how their patients are doing relative to the averages. So there's a lot here.
Awesome.
As well as best pricing. So we're able to drive the patient and keep them with the practitioner.
That's a great point. Is that every patient who subscribes or becomes part of the TROKIE Wellness program through a doctor's landing page and through a doctor's association, they get special pricing. So our best pricing is given to patients that are affiliated with doctors. And similarly, we have established for networks, clinicians who are part of networks also get preferred pricing when they become part of the Clinician of Excellence program.
Got it.
This is just an example of packages of the services that we provide. In this case, we provide a starter bundle that includes a product starting kit, the Center of Excellence referral program, which is the digital landing page, the 1-year subscription to the Trokie Tracker service, which is free to the patients, and then also a 1-year subscription to the Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research Journal, which is one of the premier journals for cannabinoid research. This is a digital subscription that they get that also gives them access to the entire historical record for the CCR journal.
Excellent. And then you have a code for them to go to as a network affiliate.
Actually, that's the beautiful thing. You don't need a code. For instance, if your listeners and your colleagues from the Association of Extremity Nerve Surgeons or colleagues of yours that are part or listeners of the Pod of Inquiry, if they come through this this portal, which we'll give the link to in the next slide, they will automatically be tracked. And they will automatically, and when I mean track, they will automatically be affiliated and given the special pricing associated with your listeners.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So even for both patients and for clinicians who are interested in being part of the Center of Excellence program, or for patients who want to be affiliated with you, or as either your direct patients or people who are your audience on the Pod of Inquiry, all they have to do is go through that portal, and they will immediately be given the preferred pricing under your landing page.
And you have that link for them?
Yep. So that's that's right here. So all they have to do is go to trokie.com/pod/ and it'll take them right to it, a page, and it'll say, are you a clinician or are you a patient? You just click that thing and it'll automatically take you through a registration program that will give you the preferred pricing on both sides.
Well, thank you guys so much. And for everybody, all the listeners out there, make sure you check out next week's episode, which will be the continuation of this, because it's a great product. I highly endorse it. And I've got the N of 1 study to show that it really works for me. So thanks so much.
And now a message from our sponsor. Well, folks, if you're over 40 and you're not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really rethink that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention the cardio protection. Nitric oxide is a physiological molecule that does so many things for your health. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, just go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pod of Inquiry. Use Pod of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I am certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but for all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see that nearly every one of them will be deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them on it immediately. Now, thanks to Approved Medical Solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates. Thanks for watching. You can start today.
I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.